great to be back up here in front of all of you. It really is such a blessing to be together on a day like this, to worship God, to encourage each other, and to keep growing in our walk with the Lord. All of today's scriptures will be on the screen. I will also give them out in advance so you can follow along if you would like to. All scriptures are copied out of the New King James Version of the Bible. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'll have you turn to Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9. And as we get started, I want to ask you a question. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of something called Schrodinger's cat. I figured some of you would know. Now the others, if you're worried that I'm going to preach a sermon about cats, don't worry, I'm not. But Schrodinger's cat is a famous thought experiment from physics. And here's the idea in simple terms. The scientists imagined putting a cat in a closed box with a tiny bit of poison that could be released depending on a random event. Now, until the box is opened, you don't know if the cat is alive or dead. And in this really strange way of thinking, the cat is considered both alive and dead at the same time until the box is open and you see the reality. Now, I don't know about you, but to me that's a little crazy. The way I see it, a cat is either alive or it's not. End of story. But the point of the experiment wasn't really about cats. It was about how we see things. How we see them, what we assume, and what we believe. And these things can really change the way we understand reality. And that's what I want to talk today about, is perspectives. Your perspective, my perspective, man's perspective, and most importantly, God's perspective. So let's go ahead and open up God's Word together before I share this story. I want to read from Isaiah 55, verse 8 and 9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Right there, God is reminding us that his view is different. It's higher and it's better. Go ahead and turn to 1 Samuel 16, verse 7. God sees the whole picture, and we see only just a little tiny piece of it. And so often, what looks terrible from our perspective may actually be God working something out for good. In 1 Samuel 16, verse 7, but the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or his physical stature, because I have refused him. But the Lord does not see as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at his heart. From our human viewpoint, we often judge by what we see on the outside. We think we know what's best based on looks, strength, or circumstances. But God reminds us that his perspective goes deeper. He sees the heart. That means even when things don't look promising, God may already be working out his perfect plan. And that brings us into today's lesson, embracing different perspectives. See, I wasn't just trying to shake things up this morning. It was so you'd have a different perspective today. I think I just skipped a complete page. Nope, we're good. Sometimes the smallest shift, like moving a few feet in the auditorium, can really change what you see, change what you notice, and how you experience them. And if that's true with a seat in the church, how much more true is it with the way we live our lives, the way we face our struggles, and the way we walk with God? Now I'm going to tell you a story. It's one that really shaped how I see the perspectives. And this story is going to show three perspectives. It's going to show mine as a teenager, my mom's, and God's. So let's go back about 25 years. It was the summer I was 16, and I was spending it out here with my dad. And at the end of the summer, I asked him if I can stay and live with him instead of going back to Illinois with Mom. And you know what he told me? He told me no. Now, from my perspective at the time, it was pretty devastating. I thought my own father doesn't want me. 16 years old, trying to figure everything out. And hearing no, well, that felt like pure rejection. But looking back now, I thank God that he said no. Because the truth is, if I had stayed here, I know without a doubt I would not be here today. I would not be alive. See, God was already working a plan that I couldn't see. That's perspective. What felt like rejection at the time, it turned out to be God's protection. See, a few days before I was due to fly home back to Illinois, I got sick. Just a little summertime cold. Nothing serious, that's what we all thought. But that cold ended up triggering a medical condition that would change the next 2 years of my life. Honestly, it would change the rest of my life. The doctors later explained to Mom and I it was called idiopathic chronic pericarditis. Now I'm going to break that down for you because it is a mouthful. One of my pediatric cardiologists, she had a great sense of humor, told me that idiopathic means the doctors are idiots and the patient's pathetic. Now in reality, idiopathic just means they can't find the cause. Chronic means it's long term. And pericarditis is inflammation of the sac that surrounds the heart. Basically, my heart wasn't working the way it was supposed to. I kept getting a buildup of fluid between the heart muscle and the pericardium. And when the fluid would build up in the sac, and the sac being made up of a fibrous material that does not stretch, the pressure of the fluid was literally crushing my heart muscle down to where it would not work right. At first, we really didn't know how bad it was. I thought I just had a cold, and after a couple of days, I felt better. But once I got back to Illinois, and a couple of days goes by, I started going downhill pretty fast. Mom took me over to the urgent care, and we spent hours there. And they ran test after test, and they couldn't find anything. They were just about to send us home, when by the last minute, and by the pure grace of God, following an urge the doctor felt, she did a chest x-ray. And what that showed was my heart was 2 to 3 times the size that it should have been. And it was collapsing the bottom third of my right lung and the bottom 2/3 of my left lung. I later found out, Mom was told that doctor hadn't made the choice to take that simple run-of-the-mill chest x-ray, I wouldn't have lived through the night. Now, from my perspective at the time, I thought it was kind of exciting. I know, it's weird. But I got to ride in an ambulance, lights and sirens blaring, speeding through intersections, and to top all that off, 2 really pretty EMTs were taking good care of me. So 16-year-old me, this is awesome! But after I got to Chicago, and they ran the first of about 200 echocardiograms, I heard Dr. Poffel, the cardiac specialist, talking to a couple people out in the hallway, and he said, this boy shouldn't be alive, let alone sitting up laughing and talking. Get me an OR right now. See, that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a cool ambulance ride. This was bad. The next 2 years of my life were full of hospital visits, medications, pain, exhaustion, and days I just thought it would never end. From where I stood as a teenage boy, this was horrible. Why me? And I asked God that many a times at night. I was focused on the pain, the exhaustion, the medication that made me gain weight and gave me nightmares. From my view, I had it worse than anyone. But here's the truth of this. My view was very small. I only saw me. See, there was someone else whose perspective was much deeper. Now, I want you to try and consider moms for a minute. While I was focused on how bad I had it, Mom was the one scheduling every appointment, driving me 2-3 times a week to Chicago. That's 55 miles one direction to get there. She was the one keeping the house running, trying to keep her business going, holding everything together. And during that time, she never let me see her weakness. She never let me see her fear. She was so strong, even when inside she was breaking. Since then, she's told me that every morning she would stand outside my bedroom door, praying I was alive, afraid to open it. And then she'd hear me snore. So from her point of view, she lived with a daily fear of losing her son. Yet she showed nothing but strength. Can you imagine carrying that fear every single morning and still putting on strength for someone else? I couldn't do it. I don't think I could, at least. So I want to take a moment and say this publicly, right here in front of my church family. Mom, I know I didn't see it back then. I know there were times I was angry, ungrateful, and more focused on myself than anyone else. But looking back now, I see how much you sacrificed, how much you carried, and how strong you had to be when I was at my weakest. I know about the tears you cried in secret. I see the courage you showed me every day. And I want you to know how grateful I am. Because I wouldn't be here without your strength, your love, and your faith. So go ahead and turn to Romans 8:28. And finally we get to God's perspective. He saw the whole picture even when I couldn't. And sometimes you get to see the gratitude, and it only comes when you look back and see what someone has done for you. You know, I realized while I was doing this sermon right here, and I didn't know it at the time, but I was my mom's very own Schrodinger's cat. She didn't know if I'd be alive or dead when she was standing at that door every morning. That's a pretty good perspective, isn't it? And the Bible speaks of this kind of shift in perspective. And Paul captures that exact truth in one of the most hope-filled verses in Scripture when he tells us in Romans 8:28, he says, "And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose." Notice it doesn't say all things are good. Being sick wasn't good. Watching Mom carry that burden certainly wasn't good. But looking back, I can see how God worked through it for good. Go ahead and turn to Ecclesiastes 3:11. God used that doctor's last-minute decision. He used our location only 55 miles away from one of the best hospitals in the nation. He used my dad to put me at arm's length of that hospital. He used my mom's strength to keep me going when I wanted to give up. He put me under the care of some of his best doctors. And from my perspective at the time, it was all bad. But from God's perspective, he was weaving it into something really good. He was teaching me lessons that I'll never forget. And he was shaping my future self in ways that someday I pray I'll fully understand. How many of you can look back on something painful and now you can see how good it was? And if we need more encouragement or another reminder about God's perspective, King Solomon, using the wisdom that he was given, says it beautifully in Ecclesiastes 3:11. He has made everything beautiful in time. Also, he put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from the beginning to the end. Go ahead and turn to Philippians 1, verse 12. That verse reminds us that God's timing isn't our timing. At 16, hooked up to IVs, missing out on life, I didn't see anything beautiful in what I was going through. But years later, I can see how God was working through it, building patience in me, giving gratitude to me, and shaping my faith. See, that's the difference in perspective. I only saw pain, but God saw the beauty he was making in his time. And Paul experienced this very truth in Philippians 1:12 when he wrote from prison. But I want you to know, brethren, that the things which happened to me have actually turned out for the furtherance of the gospel. Paul was locked up in prison. And from his perspective, it could have felt like a setback. But from God's perspective, it was the very thing that advanced the gospel. Sometimes what looks like setbacks in our lives is actually a setup for God to do something greater. When I look back at those 2 years of sickness, I realize how different my perspective was compared to God's and compared to Mom's. As a teenager, mine was narrow. I only saw me. I saw the pain, the exhaustion, the missed days of school, the weight gain from the medication, and the frustration of not being able to live like a normal teenager. And I thought life couldn't get any worse. Go ahead and turn to 2 Kings 6, verse 17. But my mom's perspective, that was bigger. She saw me fighting for life every day. She carried a fear I couldn't imagine. She lived with constant uncertainty, but I was too young and self-focused to notice it. And still she stood strong, never letting me see her break. Then above both of our perspectives was God's. God saw the whole picture. He saw the end from the beginning of it. He saw the doctor pausing for one more test. He saw the hospital being close enough to get me there in time. He saw Mom's tears in the shower. And he heard her whispered prayers at my bedroom door. God's perspective was higher than mine. It was higher than hers. Just like he tells us in Isaiah 55, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways. And you know, it's really true that sometimes God has to open our eyes to be able to see his perspective. And that's exactly what happens in 2 Kings 6:17. And Elijah prayed and said, Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see. Then the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elijah. See, the servant thought they were surrounded with no way out. From his perspective, it looked hopeless. But when God opened his eyes, he saw the truth. That God's army was already there protecting them. That's the difference between our perspective and God's. We see danger and defeat. God sees deliverance and victory. Go ahead and turn to James 1, verses 2 to 4. And you know what else I've learned from this? Perspective changes how we see trials. And this isn't just something that I discovered the hard way. James tells us directly what trials are meant to do in our lives. He writes in chapter 1, verse 2 to 4, My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. Now, if you told me at 16 to count it all joy, while I was hooked up to IVs and missing football games and popping handfuls of medication, I probably would have laughed or cried in your face. Because from my perspective, there was no joy in it. But looking back, I can see the patience that it built into me. I can see the gratitude that it planted in me. And I can see the strength it gave me through it and through Mom's example. What felt like pointless suffering at the time was actually shaping me. That's perspective. But turn to Proverbs 3, verse 5. Let me say this. Sometimes perspective comes in time. You don't always see it in the moment. You might not even see it for years. Some of you are walking through things right now that feel unbearable. And maybe like me at 16, your perspective is, this is the worst thing ever. Why me, Lord? But God sees it differently. He sees what you can't. He sees how he's going to use this, even when you can't imagine how. Proverbs 3:5 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. At 16, I was leaning on my own understanding. And from my view, everything was unfair and hopeless. But God's path was already laid out, even though I couldn't see it. See, that's why I asked you to change your seats earlier. Because sometimes just shifting your position, even a little, gives you a whole new perspective. The room looks different. The people around you look different. The things you didn't notice before suddenly become visible. And if that's true for where you sit in this auditorium, how much more true is it with where you stand in life? So let's circle on back to the Schrodinger's cat. Remember having that thought experiment? The cat was considered both alive and dead until the box was opened. That whole idea is about perspective. From the outside, you don't know and you just can't see. But when the box is open, the truth is revealed. In a way, that was Mom's reality every single morning. From her perspective, standing at my door, she didn't know if I was alive or dead. She had to build up the courage to open that box, praying that I was still in there. And when she'd hear me snore, she knew we were given another day. Perspective changes everything. From where I stood, I was the one suffering. I thought I had it so bad. From her point of view, she was living in daily fear, carrying that weight, yet showing nothing but strength. And from God's perspective, he was working in ways that neither of us could see, protecting, providing, and preparing me for a future I couldn't yet imagine. So friends, let me tell you, every single one of us has blind spots in the things we see. Every single one of us only sees a sliver of the full picture. That's why God calls us to trust him. Because his perspective is complete. His view is higher, and his wisdom is perfect. Go ahead and turn to John 13, verse 7. So you may be in a place right now, from your perspective, it feels hopeless. Maybe it feels unfair. Maybe it feels like nothing good could ever come out of it. But let me encourage you, God sees more than you do. He sees the whole box. He sees beyond the pain. He sees how he will work it for good, even when you can't see it today. And sometimes God uses the people around us, like he used my mom for me, to carry us, strengthen us, and remind us to keep going. And Jesus himself made this truth clear in John 13:7 when he told Peter, what I am doing, you do not understand now, but you will know after this. Peter didn't understand why Jesus was washing his feet. It didn't make sense from his perspective. But Jesus told him, you'll understand later. Sometimes God's work in our lives doesn't make sense in the moment. But later, when we look back, we see exactly what he was doing all along. But turn to 2 Corinthians 4:16. So what do we do with this? What's the takeaway? It's simple. We need to learn to embrace different perspectives. Not just our own limited one, but the perspective of others who may be carrying silent burdens that we can't see. And most importantly of all, the perspective of God who sees the entire picture. Paul gives us a perfect reminder that our trials are temporary, but God's perspective is eternal. Paul wrote these words in 2 Corinthians 4:16 through 18. Therefore, we do not lose heart, even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory, while we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal. That's perspective. Our trials may look overwhelming in the moment, but compared to eternity, they're pretty light and temporary. God is using them to shape us for something greater than we can imagine. I want to circle back to one more perspective, and that of gratitude. When I think about those years of sickness, I can't help but think about Mom and the way she carried me when I couldn't carry myself. And I thank God for her. Because her strength was one of the clearest pictures of God's love I've ever experienced. So let me say it again. Mom, I am so grateful for all you did through that time. Friends, if there is someone in your life who's carried you, who has been your strength when you had none, don't wait until years later to say thank you. Tell them today. Show them today. That shift in perspective might just change the both of you. So here's my invitation. Where do you need a new perspective? Maybe you're walking through something hard, and from your perspective it feels unbearable. But will you trust God's perspective, that He's working even this for good? Maybe there's someone in your life who's carried you, supported you, or prayed for you and you didn't even realize it. Will you take the time to thank them and to thank God for them? Maybe you've been leaning on your own understanding and trying to figure it out from your limited view. And it's time to surrender to God's perspective, God's plan, and God's way. If you need prayer, this is the time. If you need to lay down your burdens, this is the time. If you've never given your life to Christ in baptism, or if you've wandered and you're ready to come back home, don't wait until tomorrow. Don't wait until you think you've got it figured out. Trust God's perspective today. Because here's the truth. Your perspective is limited, but God's is perfect. So the question is, will you trust in Him today? He's inviting you to trust Him, and not just with your struggles, but with your whole life. The invitation is open. Change your life, change your perspective. Would you please come forward now as we stand and sing?